Riddle me this. I make intestines peek out of a belly. I make bone protrude from a fractured shin. I make blood spurt from a gash in the buttocks. What annual sporting event am I? Hello, and welcome to Doomsday, history's most dangerous podcast. Together, we will rediscover some of the most traumatic, bizarre, and awe-inspiring, but largely unheard of or forgotten disasters from throughout human history and around the world. For example, on today's episode, you will hear about a man being carried around by a horn, stabbed in through his neck, and poking out his mouth. You're even going to hear the only podcast with an interactive portion that lets you pretend your face is bisected to the point you could tuck your eyeholes over your ears. This is not the podcast you play around kids, or while eating, or even in mixed company. But as long as you find yourself a little more historically engaged and learn something that could potentially save your life, our work is done. So with all that said, shoo the kids out of the room, put on your headphones and safety glasses, and let's begin. Today, we're going to travel to the mountainous, thickly jungled northern coast of Colombia. We're headed to Sinjaleo, known as the Pearl of the Savannah, the capital of Colombia's Sucre province. If you can picture an immense valley with a hilly landscape extending from the mountains to the borders of the plateau in the north and south, dotted with extensive mangrove swamps, coralliferous islands, and coconut palms, give yourself a star. You're doing great. Sinjaleo is a modern city and home to about 300,000 people. Prior to 1535, this whole area was inhabited by an indigenous people known as the Xenu, which has nothing to do with Scientology. After 1535, this area was founded after the Spanish popped by and discovered the region. They then went on to convince the OG locals to take up unpaid positions building a town for them, or, die. Sinjaleo was intended to follow the classical Spanish colonial grid design, with the main church and its square in the geographic center. But this wasn't possible in Sinjaleo because several creeks and rivers ran through the town's space. The Xenu were punished for the area's geographic insolence. If this had been New Amsterdam, they would have just paved over everything all the way to the ocean. But paving as a strategy was still several hundred years away. The locals had been using the rivers as natural highways for as long as they could remember. It was easy and efficient. It took time, but eventually, the Spanish saw that there might be some wisdom to the Xenu's use of rivers. Then they were punished for not pointing this out sooner. A large festivity was held to christen the new town of San Francisco de Asís de Sinjaleo, in honor of the feast day of Francis of Assisi, a man who was said to have the first recorded incidents of spontaneous stigmata and a lover of animals. But this is not the story of an oppressed people pushed to extinction by foreign invaders. Today's story is one of people pushed into personal extinction by alcohol and poor decision-making. Every January, Sinjaleo turns into ground zero as tens of thousands descend on the town for the Fiestas del Dulce Nombre de Jesus, or in English, the Party of the Sweet Name of Jesus, also known as Jesus' Sweet Name Party. Whole families, cowboys and women in brightly colored skirts and blouses, already sweltering in the 90-degree heat, scrambled up steep clay riverbanks from boats and water taxis to join in the celebration. Bands of musicians tuned up and would play pretty much continuously for the next 10 days. Encuentro Nacional de Bandas also takes place in Sinjaleo. It's basically an open-air American Idol, where folk bands perform the traditional musical styles of the Savannah region, porro and fandango, kind of like Brazilian samba. Lively beats and trumpets for days. The kind of music that makes you want to put on a fake mustache and dance. To celebrate our trip, we're going to be visiting the largest Corralejas festival in Colombia. There will be music, there will be drinking, there'll be a slew of parades and parties, even a beauty contest. But the main reason for this season, at least the most exhilarating and bloodthirsty part, is the bullfighting. Now you may already be, where's my skip, pause, or unsubscribe button? I do not want to hear about cows being killed. Well, don't worry, neither do I. And spoiler, you won't. The Spanish hate the term bullfighting. They call it La Corrida de Toros. Supporters argue up and down that it's an art form, a kind of choreographed dance. The fact that it's the only art form that demands the occasional death is part of what makes it so unique. They argue that risking life in the creation of something which is artistic creates an attraction. If that argument sounded like a hot plate of gibberish, you probably wouldn't like the rest of the less tangible philosophical and metaphysical explanations either. Detractors, on the other hand, will argue that the whole thing is just a kind of fancy-pants dance before the killing of a bull, that it's nothing more than a blood sport, or at best, a kind of ritual sacrifice. You want to read about La Corridas in the paper? Skip the sports section. You're going to need the art section, and I'm not making that up. Bullfights occur throughout the Spanish-speaking world, particularly in Latin America. Famous matadors travel an international circuit around South and Central America to take part in fights. There are local variants in Portugal and the south of France, even in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Some apparently require fireworks, like attached to the bulls. In other bullfighting cultures, the matador is revered as a hero and a celebrity, standing unafraid, mesmerizing the animal with his capework and allowing it to pass within mere inches of his body with each new charge, that many describe as being like a life-and-death ballet. In traditional bullfighting, the end always results in the bull being put to death by the sword, or swords. At the Corralejas, which are arguably 100 times more brutal, the bulls remain largely unharmed. At least, they'll survive the experience. Let me try that again. At least they'll survive the experience. Spoiler alert, there will be blood. We're going to stick to the term bullfighting, but we're going to use it as loosely as possible. What we're going to discuss today is like someone set up their own bullfight league after being too drunk to think enough to understand the rules. If you think the idea of an amateur league bullfight in the jungle sounds quaint or curious, you're not ready for the Corralejas. I promise you, the Corralejas is going to make the running of the bulls in Pamplona look like a kitten rally at an adoption center. If you're having trouble picturing the enormity of a bull, picture a cow. A completely jacked 2,000-pound cow coated in muscles, with thicker bones, larger feet, a thick muscular neck, and a large bony head with protective ridges over the eyes. Basically a Klingon cow. We said there were local variants to bullfighting, and we're going local with the weirdest and most dangerous variant anywhere. You know that weird sport where Brits chase a cheese wheel down a hill and injure themselves terribly? The Corralejas will make that look like Walmart on a double coupon day. In an article titled, How to Escape or Avoid a Bull, it explains, you don't need to know parkour in order to escape a charging bull or cow. You'll find that adrenaline can cause you to do things you normally couldn't do under stress and fear for your life. Ideally though, if you don't know parkour or aren't particularly athletic, it's wise to make sure you avoid a situation where a bull will be charging at you in the first place. I can picture this written out on a big sign outside the Corralejas, which fell and was stomped in the mud beneath 10,000 or more excited visitors as they march past. Spoiler alert again, there's a very good chance a bull will be charging you if you take place in the Corralejas, and there isn't a health screening for participants. There isn't even a sign-up sheet. Here, thousands of spectators watch as open entry participants, and the qualifications here really just mean you can make your way into the ring on your own power. These participants attempt to outrun serious injury and death while under the influence of alcohol or other drugs, which rob one of the basic reflexes or physical condition needed to operate a motor vehicle, let alone defend oneself from the provoked charge of a bull. The stands are basically a temporary holding area for drunken injury enthusiasts. It's effectively Jackass meets bullfighting, but I promise it'll be so much more. And remember, there's an actual disaster to be had in this episode. Welcome to Colombian Thunderdome, the world's greatest extreme sport. Each year, a stadium is constructed. In the early days, it began as a kind of ramshackle fence designed to keep bulls from straight-up killing spectators. As time went on and the Corralejas grew in popularity, the arena really took shape, becoming more complex, starting with a platform which was added so the wealthy could enjoy a more private view. The whole thing evolved over time into something twice the size of a football field that could seat 8,000 people. Construction starts at the end of December, and actual civil engineers and architects supervise as dozens of workers assemble a 3-story temporary medieval-style wooden circular structure. The stands are made from bamboo, rope, and spare lumber. A loosely thatched roof circles the perimeter of the stands to provide protection from the sun. The end result is equally shoddy and impressive. In the upper stands, the crowd dances to live music while drinking rum and beer for the better part of the day. The Corralejas began as a sort of cattle fair that slowly turned dark over time. Rich cattle farmers began offering rewards to whatever rowdy, risk-hungry type could perform a spectacular stunt during a dance with a bull. Sometimes the wealthy landowners who lent the bulls for the festival would throw money into the arena to watch poor people scramble after it, knowing that in the excitement someone was going to get careless and get caught by a horn or a hoof. Did I mention the drinking? You will not find an elegance of choreography and movement playing itself out here. Here, you'll find hundreds of less than sober amateur matadors, many in advanced stages of inebriation, pitted against a 2,000-pound animal. The drink of choice is called aguardiente. That's a catch-all term for distilled spirits, made using whatever ingredients are available locally, from grapes to bananas to rice and beets and potatoes. If it can ferment, they will drink it. But be careful, The term aguardiente is a portmanteau of Spanish words for water and burning or fiery, and it ranges from 30 to 60% alcohol. In other parts of the country, the Corralejas are seen as barbaric or bizarre, or even grotesque, but to the residents of the northern savannas, an impoverished region with cattle ranching culture and a history of feeding poor people the bulls for fun while draining tubs of aguardiente going back centuries, the Corralejas are passionately defended. At a typical Corraleja, there is a festival spirit. Brass bands in the stands rouse the crowds with their tubas, trumpets, and drums, and square off like a battle of the bands. Radio reporters from RCN and Carasol, Colombia's two main radio networks, even broadcast live from the event. The upper levels are reserved for the upper class, ranchers and bigwigs in local industries, who demand shade from the afternoon heat, and throw beer cans at passing bulls while jeering the athletic abilities of would-be matadors. In a recent study published in the British Medical Journal, according to the available evidence, men are much more likely to be idiots.
Say what?
Or at least engage in idiotic behavior. A database of Darwin Award winners, people who died so spectacularly or thoughtlessly that their action ensured the long-term survival of the species, was heavily consulted. Winners must, quote, show an astounding misapplication of common sense. The data excludes those who don't successfully eliminate themselves from the gene pool, like one man who slipped using a belt sander as an autoerotic device and lost a testicle. He was able to repair his scrotum using a staple gun and saved the other testicle. Although, he will probably join the list eventually. The study explores the idea that males are willing to take unnecessary risks simply as a rite of passage in pursuit of social esteem or just for bragging rights. For the young men entering the ring, it's a kind of rite of initiation. For young women, they're an opportunity to look for a worthy boyfriend. They'll have such smart babies. Idiotic behavior confers some, as yet unidentified, selective advantage on those who do not become casualties. There wasn't an easy way to adjust the data to see how alcohol skewed the results. From 2 to 6 p.m. each day, hundreds of menteros make their way into the ring in a kind of drunken homage to the gladiators of the Roman Colosseum, with a few notable exceptions. Unlike traditional bullfights, this is more like a battle royale or a royal rumble. Nowhere else do you get to fight more than one bull at a time, and nowhere else do you have this much company while you do it. Even wrestling is supposed to have rules about how many people can be in the ring. And oh, the things you'll see. You might see a man dressed as a clown tossed into a parking lot. You might see an accountant fight a bull with an umbrella. Maybe you catch an ear like it was tossed into the crowd as a keepsake. Uniform was not necessary. You won't see any sequined outfits here. Actually, you might see some sequined outfits here, but it's not the kind of thing you're thinking. This was an off-the-rack come-as-you-are occasion, where men wore anything from suits to gorilla suits to full dragon heels to Speedos. They wave red capes to incite the bulls to rage, except bulls really don't care about red capes. TV and cartoons have done a terrible job teaching you about bull psychology. For starts, like most mammals, cattle are red-green colorblind. It's the movement of the matador's cape and not the color that taunts them into action. Want to know why they really use red? Why, to hide the blood splashes, of course. Matadors looking to make a buck often use their cape as a vehicle for branding. They enter the ring flashing ads for different alcohol brands or politicians in hopes of showing up later in photos. Marketers call this earned media. Dozens and dozens of people run in every direction. Men in Stetsons on horseback act as a kind of crowd control. Dust and debris fly everywhere. It feels and looks more like a battlefield than a sporting event. The mood is somewhere between the actual original Australian Mad Max post-oil apocalypse and the Burning Man festival, but with fewer rules. I once saw a small group of wackos start a small fire in the ring to brew coffee as if they were at a picnic, till the bull came. They reminded me of a Darwin Award-winning trio who played Russian roulette, taking shots and turns stomping on an old landmine. The ring itself looks like the last scene of Woodstock, littered with papers and bottles, scraps of discarded clothes, shoes, teeth, maybe a finger. It's the only outdoor festival in the world where you can later test the dirt for its blood alcohol content. Then there's the bulls. Different cattle farms are in charge of supplying the bulls each year, and in a 4-hour afternoon, 40 bulls will be released onto the crowds. The thing is, bulls are not naturally aggressive. They may look ferocious, and they can certainly get fairly pissy, but they are naturally shy and nervous. If you were to walk into their pasture, they would probably run away, not charge at you. The legend of Ferdinand the Bull is closer to the truth than you'd think. Of course, you can get past this and drive them into a frenzied state by corralling them in cramped pens and beating them with barbed sticks called bandoleras before releasing them into the ring. Bullfighting, as we understand it, began in ancient Crete. It pitted the dexterity of man against the strength of the animal. The bull was a sacred animal, and the ancient Minoan frescoes of the area depict bullfighting as a religious event. This sport consisted of jumping onto a bull by holding onto its horns and somersaulting over it. It was basically bull avoidance in the most difficult way possible, but that was then. These people can barely keep their pants up half the time. Photos and videos of a modern Corralejas are cinematic chaos. One participant explained, "This is about the ecstasy of escaping death. It is part of us as human beings. The fear of death itself is flung aside for a brief, exhilarating moment. It's always surprising when people say they're not afraid to die. Most people are quick to point out that they are afraid to die painfully and completely gloss over the idea of no longer being alive. People fear death because they're fearful of how it comes, not just because it represents the unknown. We fear what we don't know, and most people don't love pain. You could argue that fear is the obstacle that holds us back from accomplishing anything. Immortality would render the prospect of life pointless. Having an expiry date or a time limit gives life value. And if you want to extend that logic, risking your life can help you enjoy it and feel a purpose to keep going as the clock runs out. But that's just an extension of logic and it's not my philosophy. Screw that. The interior ring of the stadium is made of fairly open fencing, about 5 or 6 feet tall, packed to standing room only with spectators. They make shipping pallets look like aluminum siding. Bulls often chase people up these walls, prodding and exploring the ring for buttocks to stab and ribs to snap. Every now and then, a random body is hooked by a horn and thrown like a rag doll to the cheers of the crowd. It's easy to imagine the Virgin of La Macarena, patron saint of bullfighters, looking down on the festivities, but doing that thing where you cover your eyes and just peek through the cracks in your fingers. When a person manages to avoid an attack, they immediately scramble in the opposite direction for safety. They always underestimate how agile and fast a 2,000-pound bull can really be. Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt, the fastest man in history, holds the world record time of running 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. Amazingly, that's as fast as a bull can run too, 22 miles per hour or 35 kilometers per hour. So unless you're actually faster than Usain Bolt, you will not do well. By the time these people are on the ground, they are squarely on the bull's to-do list. Most often picked up by their clothes, which are unceremoniously removed by the bull's powerful thrashing before the real injuries start to pile up. Way back in episode 1, we alluded to the kind of ridiculous amount of force and energy it would take to strip a standing person of their clothes without using hands. Imagine being so drunk that you found yourself denuded by an enraged 2,000-pound beast that uses pointy horns bigger than an NBA sneaker in a slashing, stabbing motion to strip you naked in front of thousands of people. That's if you're not accidentally trampled by a horse's hoof or speared by a bandoleras or injured by another would-be bullfighter. A reporter interviewed a man who'd been speared through the hand by a horseman. He said, "My hand feels like it's on fire, but I'm fine." If a rider or matador is injured in any way, trained professionals leap in at great personal risk. No one person could hope to stop or control an angry bull, but they do what they can to distract them. At the Corralejas, well-meaning amateurs perform the same function, waving flags and hoisting umbrellas, riding in wheelbarrows, performing quote-unquote transvestite fashion shows, playing fireball from that one episode of Friends, running around in tight, drunken little spirals. Anything goes, but nothing really works. Remember, bullfighting isn't a ballet. No one needs dozens of stitches halfway through a ballet. Devotees and enthusiasts openly show off deep, discolored scars earned over the years from being trampled and gored. They will often walk the stands displaying their wounds to receive money in return, like semi-disabled buskers. Injuries are as imaginative as they are numerous. In researching this episode, the worst injuries I saw included a man being carried around the ring by a horn stabbed through the neck and poking out his mouth, people carried around the ring by a horn through their stomach, and people gored through the groin or anus, and one man who was stabbed through the face and out the eye socket. Because bullhorns are long, sharp, and curved, there's always an interest in how and where a bull enters and exits somewhere unrelated. People have been gored in the throat, stabbed in the head, had their faces smashed in, among other crush injuries. They've had their eyes torn out, various impalings, groin injuries, shattered jaws, stab wounds, broken skulls, puncture wounds, and crushed bones. But wait, there's more! Scalp removals, severed fingers and toes, uncountable orphan teeth, broken necks, dislocated spines, partial facial removal and other lacerations, shattered ribs, forced anal prolapsing, compound fractures, that's the one where the bone comes out to get a little air, and full-on disembowelings. This event has everything shy of a person spitting out vertebrae from a neck hole like a Pez dispenser. I saw one video of a man launched into the second level of the arena at the end of a bull's horns. He stuck the landing like Spider-Man, of course, because the second level of the stands are ringed with barbed wire. One Mantero named Orlando Canchilla situated himself way too close to the bull's arena entrance and was immediately slapped stupid by the gate, then gored repeatedly while lying on the ground. Some people think playing dead is the best thing you can do. Those people are thinking of bears, and even then they're wrong. It may work with a grizzly, but not with a black bear. I'll always remember a story of a woman feeding a bear in Yellowstone National Park from a guide loosely titled, "Everything That Will Kill You in Yellowstone National Park." That seriously had about 50 subdivided chapters. Even though a ranger tried to warn her it was ridiculously dangerous, she wasn't having it. When the woman ran out of food, the bear casually pawed her for more, accidentally removing her entire chest. And don't get me started on buffalo or bison. But let's get back to bulls. A frustrated bull may continue to see you as an object of frustration and continue to beat you relentlessly until they eventually grow tired and lose interest, but by that time you will be well past caring. A bull can be quite cunning too. They may realize you're attempting to play dead and pretend to leave you alone until you move. Orlando Canchilla was only rescued when others managed to distract the bull. He was actually seen climbing to his feet under his own power. When he was taken out of the ring, they wanted to rush him to the hospital. I'll tell you why in a second. In Spain, when bullfighter Victor Barrio was killed by a bull, he was given a hero send-off. Hundreds of mourners cheered and wept as his jewel-encrusted coffin was carried through the streets. The King of Spain himself expressed condolences, and his hometown was closed for 2 days of public mourning. Things are a little different in Colombia. The best way to describe Orlando's injuries is with the as-promised at-home interactive activity. First, grab a red marker. Or if you don't have a marker, I suppose you can just use your finger. Now, starting from the top of your head, and trace a line down your scalp towards the middle of your nose. Now draw a line diagonally from your nose to your neck below your right ear. Now draw another line running down each cheek to your chin, and imagine each side of your face being held together with your hands. You could actually hook your eye holes over your ears and go hands-free. Even though Orlando needed dozens of stitches to hold his face flap shut so that he could see out of a forward-facing eye hole, he refused to go to the hospital and opted for a stitch job in the parking lot. Even though he still needed more than 50 stitches to hold the rest of his torso together, he ran back out into the bull ring to bask in the cheers of the crowd and collect money that was thrown at him as tribute for his bravery. One 53-year-old participant, Luid Cuadrado, has been speared 56 times and shows off the scars from 2,425 stitches, many along his abdomen. Angel Chima, 59, shows off one particularly nasty wound, now healed, from when a bull's horn entered squarely through his nose. Unlike regular bullfights, these bulls are not killed in the end because they're frankly expensive. If a bull is exhausted, or as often happens tripped up by a rope, the crowd swarms in, pelting it with rocks, kicking it, slapping it, spitting on it, and pulling its tail. Animal rights activists deplore the bull festivals, calling on officials to prevent minors from attending and to prohibit the use of bandoleras with horses, which are frequently killed by the bulls during the event, adding to the mess. Nadim Macareno explains that unlike horses in Spanish bullfights, here they wear no padding. 60 of my horses have been killed, he said proudly. The one with the more dead horses is me. Would you believe that people die every year doing this? Would you believe that it's considered good luck? Another way of saying that, would you believe it's considered bad luck and gravely disappointing if someone doesn't die? This year is calm, no deaths yet, said Felipe Bertel Munoz, who broadcast the names, ages, and injuries of the wounded to the listeners of RCN Radio. Some say it is good luck for at least one person to die, but our paramedics are too talented to let that happen easily. The sense of luck that fans coveted was about to be sorely tested, but let's put a pin in that for just 1 second. Let's say that you're looking for a place to escape the cold in January, and for whatever reason you land on Colombia, and because you're a decision-making machine, you decide to attend a Corralejas. Your vacation choices may require some familiarity with some of the more obscure, better to know and not need than need and not know Spanish phrases for various medical scenarios. They don't have 911 in Colombia. The number you're looking for is either 112 or 123. That's what they'll tell you. You'll either talk to the police or a national emergency operator. Can't tell you which exactly. Health and Emergency Services is 125, but 24-hour emergencies and ambulances are 132. But maybe you were trampled and your phone no longer recognizes your fingerprint or Face ID. Get someone else to dial. The most helpful thing you can do for yourself is to have a few local phrases memorized for the occasion, and we'll post these online. Ayúdame means help me. Es uno emergency. It's an emergency. Llama la ambulance. Call the ambulance. Me duele mucho. I am in a lot of pain. Mi tipo de sangre es O positive. My blood type is O positive. But let's say you took a horn to the face and you can only make flap, flap, flap sounds. Well, we can work with that too. Here are some simple tips for extreme triage. If there's bleeding, stop that. Apply firm pressure to the wound with as clean a cloth as you can find until the bleeding stops. If bone is pushing through, leave it be. Don't try to push it back in place. You could make things worse. The purpose of a splint is to hold a wounded body part as still as possible to prevent further damage. Gently tape the dislocated area or fracture to a rolled up newspaper, a ruler, a stick, or whatever you've got. Just try to include the joint above and below the injury in the splint, so there's no bending, and as much as possible, avoid moving the injured limb. Don't try to force it or twist it back into shape. Apply an ice pack wrapped in cloth or cold compress to reduce swelling, and elevate the injured area if you can. If someone has a horn broken off in them, do not try to remove it. Do what you can to stabilize it. Something inside you moving around is bound to cause a lot of damage, so it's better just to apply pressure around it. If they were impaled on a horn, like hanging from a horn, first, you are way out of your element here. I don't care who you are. You never want to remove someone from a stationary object unless it's absolutely necessary. If you have to, use the utmost care and gentility and get ready to stem, I was going to say some bleeding, but a lot of bleeding. Now, what if the bull got mad and decided to Zorro someone's stomach open? For one, the doctor you no doubt should be calling will want to call it an evisceration, or a debilitación in Spanish. If a wound is deep enough into a person's abdomen, the intestines can blorp out through the stab hole, especially if they move around a lot. The more you move, the more messed up things get. Never ever try to force the eviscerated organs back into place. Cover them with a moist, clean cloth and bandage them in place. Have the victim lie on their back and prop up their knees. Having them lay with their legs straight pulls on the abdominal muscles, so prop something under their knees to relax those muscles. And do it for them. Don't try to get them to do anything for themselves. They're going to use all these interconnected internal muscle groups and just make things even worse. Also, they're probably screaming so loud they wouldn't be able to hear your instructions anyway. Enjoy your vacation! We described how hot and muggy it was in January. Back in 1980, this entire region of Colombia had been hit by an unusually harsh rainy season. The drought season in this area usually starts in the first or second half of December and extends until the end of February to the first half of March. The rainy season starts sporadically and gradually increases, peaking in April or May. But not this year. Early flooding had been so intense that it affected over 110,000 people and took an unknown number of lives. Some believe the Corralejas should not have been held out of respect to the victims of the floods. Others, equally sober-minded and thoughtful, suggested early on while building the arena that the ground was so saturated with water it could cause damage to the structural integrity of the bull ring. But the show must go on. Spirits were lifted even further as cloud cover moved in, offering relief from the sweltering sun. As rain began to drizzle across the area, it brought much-needed refreshment and comfort, bringing toothless smiles to their smashed-in faces. Before long, the rain quickly turned into a thunderstorm, and thousands of people moved out of the rain to shelter under the thin canopy that wrapped around the edge of the arena. Even over the sound of the chaos and the partying and the uproar of people bemoaning the sudden appearance of real rain, over all of that a chorus of creaks, a snap, and a shudder raced through the overcrowded wooden stands. The naysayers had it right. The ground beneath the stadium had been reduced to a mud bath by the earlier rain, and as much as the daytime heat had tried its best to dry out the ground, the rain undid everything. With the weakening of the ground beneath the stadium and the sudden movement of so many, the weight loaded onto the structure shifted, creating a critical stress level in supports which were no longer firmly planted in the earth. You're probably familiar with the term structural integrity, but you've probably never really thought about what it means. In 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was flying between Hilo and Honolulu when an explosive decompression tore the roof off the plane, basically from the cockpit all the way back to the wings. Instead of snapping in half and falling into the ocean below, with the sad exception of one flight attendant who was pulled from the plane, the pilots were able to safely land with no other fatalities. It was a horrible story, but a fantastic example of incredible structural integrity built right into the design. Not just the idea of a thing holding itself together, but also the idea of a thing failing or falling apart as safely as possible. Typically, design codes require design to prevent damage in normal use, like a series of stands with people sitting appropriately. Most codes include specific clauses that ensure a minimum level of robustness under extreme conditions, like when those same fans jump to their feet and start dancing. But how structures are used in reality can greatly differ from how they're intended, like when thousands of people shift their collective weight from one side of the stands to another seeking shelter from a storm. A wave of panic rose and spread as the stands began to lurch and collapse under the weight of thousands of people. Some people leapt from the stands in an effort to save themselves, while others ran in any direction they could, including into the bull ring itself, which contained 4 large and angry bulls at the time. Many people, including young children, were trampled to death in the panic. As the structure began to give way, fans were dropped up to 3 stories to the mud below. As the walls and bleachers collapsed, hundreds of men, women, and children became buried in the debris and pressed into the mud where they suffocated or drowned. Many who were watching the event from beneath the stands at the time met the same fate. Because of the design, the sections of the arena that collapsed came down relatively straight, pulling the walls and all the debris in on itself, creating what you would call a dense field of carnage within a small footprint. Ironically, if the collapse had been caused by an explosion, it would have collapsed in an outward direction, resulting in a less dense, more scattered debris field, which would have been easier to escape. If you'd survived the hypothetical explosion, of course. One witness described seeing blood everywhere and corpses left where they had fallen. Most had died from crush injuries, internal hemorrhaging, or asphyxia. A stream of men would arrive at the hospital with wounds described out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting, intestines peeking out of a belly, bones protruding from a fractured shin, blood spurting from a gash in the buttocks, as promised from right off the top. It was as bad as anything they had seen during the Civil War that had affected Colombia for 4 decades. Around 40,000 people were in the stadium or at nearby concession stands when the disaster occurred. 222 were killed, and hundreds more were injured. Some estimates place the death toll at almost 400. So what went wrong? Well, first, people got drunk and tried to fight cows as tough as rhinos. They suffer from the gambler's fallacy. They believe that just because something bad happened repeatedly in the past, it won't happen again in the future. Their chances of getting their scalps removed is reduced because it already happened to someone else, so the odds are satisfied. Except bulls don't work that way. But what about the stands? It would be easy to blame a combination of poor engineering and bad weather for the destruction of the stands and the deaths of so many spectators. So many independent factors came together to destroy the arena. But people have been drunkenly abusing hastily constructed arenas for years without incident. Psychologically, the reason this disaster was, for lack of a better word, allowed to happen was because of normalcy bias. People believe something bad won't happen just because it never happened before. People with a normalcy bias have difficulties reacting to something they haven't experienced before. They also tend to interpret warnings in the most optimistic ways possible. When a primary structural element fails, it results in the failure of adjoining structural elements, which in turn causes further structural failure. When the one section collapsed, it effectively dragged others with it. Apply the right pressure to just the right places, and they'll break apart faster than you'd believe. The Corralejas was postponed for almost 2 decades after the 1980 collapse. It took until 1999 for the municipality to authorize the construction of another arena and renew the bullfighting. The authorities declared it an artistic discipline and cultural product that must be preserved for future generations. But safety measures were added, including testing the construction of the bull ring, holding evacuation drills, having increased healthcare on hand, and preventing the overly intoxicated from entering the ring. The kind of expertise to know where and how to look for signs of an impending structural failure are rare, so the only kind of real benefit gained from this disaster and others like it is the ability to study it, learn from it, and use that knowledge to prevent future disasters. That said, disaster struck again when the collapse of spectator stands at a bull ring in Doima injured more than 100 people in 2006. The collapse at Sinaloa remains the deadliest tragedy at a sporting event in Colombia's history. Our last episode had a way higher body count, but this is our most uniquely injurious episode yet. For those like myself who sit on the bullfighting is immoral side of the cultural debate, please enjoy the following anecdote. At the end of Matador Torero Alvaro Muñero's career, he collapsed in remorse mid-fight when he realized he was having to prompt an otherwise gentle beast into fighting. There are photos of this grievously wounded bull apparently comforting him as he wept in the ring. He was quoted as saying, "I looked at the bull. He had this innocence that all animals have in their eyes, and he looked at me with this pleading. It was like a cry for justice. Deep down inside of me, I described it as being like a prayer." He said he felt like a monster and went on to become a vocal opponent of bullfights. The Humane Society International, World Society for Protection of Animals, and just about everyone else with sad cat and dog commercials have called for the sport to be banned, explaining, "Blood sports like this should be consigned to the history books. No one should lose their life for entertainment, human or animal." So, dear listeners, regardless of where you sit on the ethical debate, we want to know, what's the most stitches you've ever received in a single sitting? And while you're at it, tell us how many severed thumbs out of 5 you would give this episode. 5 is an odd number of severed thumbs, yes, but when you're counting severed thumbs, every number is unusual, don't you think? You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as Doomsday Podcast, or fire us an email to doomsdaypod@gmail.com. Older episodes can be found wherever you found this one, and while you're there, please leave us a review and tell your friends. And tell your friends a 5-star review helps like-minded history buffs discover the show. If you want to support the production of the show, you can find us at patreon.com/funeralkazoo. If you're after cool episode-specific swag, you're welcome to visit us at evilreindeershop.com. But if you can spare the money and had to choose, we ask you to consider making a donation to Global Medic. Global Medic is a rapid response agency of Canadian volunteers offering assistance around the world to aid in the aftermath of disasters and crises. They're often the first and sometimes the only team to get critical interventions to people in life-threatening situations, and to date, they've helped 3.6 million people across 75 different countries. You can learn more and donate at globalmedic.ca. On the next episode, get ready for an electrifying story with a very famous celebrity guest star. It's the Brescia explosion of 1769. We'll talk soon. Safety goggles off, and thanks for listening.